Hello, everybody. How's it going today?
Hi, Colleen.
Fantastic.
Good, good. Hello, LinkedIn Live, Ketch audience. Great to be back again. It's been a minute since we did a LinkedIn Live. I guess we took a little bit of a summer break, and now the fall has been so busy with in-person events. So it's been a minute, but it's awesome to be back. And I'm thrilled to break the drought with a couple of our favorite partners. I'm here today with the team from not just Ketch, but Myna Partners, as well as Kelley Drye. And we're absolutely thrilled to bring to you today a fall enforcement actions wrap up. 2025 has been no exception to a few busy privacy years here. And we thought this would be a great time to talk with you all and share from some expert perspectives on what you need to know at this point in the year and what's helpful to you as a privacy practitioner. So thrilled to introduce Dave Cohen from Myna Partners. He'll be our moderator for the discussion today, and I will hand off to Dave and the team to get started with this educational content.
All right. Thanks so much, Colleen. Hi, everybody. It's great to be back here. As Colleen said, it's been a little while since we've done LinkedIn Live. It's great to be here. My name is Dave Cohen. I'm a director at Myna Partners, and in that role, I oversee projects. I help with internal operations, and importantly, I try to keep an eye on all of the latest developments in the privacy compliance and IT security space. So I'm really thrilled to be here today, and maybe I'll pass it over to Laura.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Laura Van Traff. I'm a partner at Kelley, Drye in Washington, D.C., where I practice in our information security and privacy group, as well as doing just general consumer protection work. My background is as a regulator at the Federal Trade Commission, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning. Sam?
Thanks, Laura. Sam.
Good morning, everyone. I am Sam Alexander, founding engineer at Ketch, based here in our headquarters in San Francisco, and spend a whole lot of time working with technologists and legal folks, business folks, in implementing privacy by design in their tech stack.
Fantastic. It's great to be here with you again, Laura and Sam. We've done a number of programs together. Love this panel, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So in front of you is the agenda for our program today. Just kind of wanted to go over this quickly, let you know what you're in store for. Just met all of us, and in a moment, I'll kind of talk about from a high 30,000-foot level what we're here to talk about today. Then we'll go and we'll look at some of the Q1 to Q3 2025 enforcement actions and developments that we've kind of singled out as maybe particularly impactful or important for certain reasons. And we'll kind of dive into the details there. I will then move on to some of the operational considerations with regards to how to tighten up your shop and comply with these new requirements. And then we're going to go take a deep dive into the technology itself with Sam and some of the great stuff that's available out there, the rapidly evolving technology to assist with these efforts. So we'll hear a little bit about that. We have reserved some time for our audience questions at the end, but we also want to encourage people to ask questions throughout. If you have a question, please pop it into the comments section. I'll keep an eye over there, and as I see them pop up, I will serve them up as appropriate. So again, this is us, and we have some contact information in the back of the deck as well. If you want to copy the deck, you can write to us, and we'll get that over to you. And moving forward for the topic overview, essentially what we're here to talk about are a number of state privacy laws that got passed, 8 specifically, that took effect in 2025. Delaware, Iowa, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey went into effect in January. Minnesota and Tennessee went into force this summer. And just a few weeks ago, Maryland's Online Data Privacy Act took effect on October 1st. And so we're going to hear about some of the details there. There's some kind of unique requirements as well. State enforcement has ramped up. We are seeing out there in the field state attorney general's offices and agencies like the CPPA have increased budget and staff and have been very active. So we're going to talk about what that looks like, what some of these enforcement actions have involved, and what you might do at your own organization to prepare yourself for similar scrutiny. And the FTC posture, we can talk a little bit about this. Actually, as Laura mentioned, she's got some background in the FTC. There's been a kind of a sea change in philosophy and strategy over there with the change in the administration, kind of a big swing. Maybe we can touch on that as well, and what that's been looking like. Suffice to say, in summary, children's privacy has been a major focus over the course of this last year. So if you're dealing with children's information at all, you're going to want to pay attention to what's happening there. And then lastly, privacy litigation transactions, class action lawsuits, et cetera. And also how to handle M&As. I know that Laura's firm sees a lot of that, and we do as well. In terms of due diligence with information being merged when companies get together. So that's kind of the high level view that we've broken this down into. And with that, let me turn it over to Laura, and we can kind of take a closer look at some of these developments.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Dave, and good morning again. I'm pleased to be with all of you. State privacy regulators, and I think we can advance, thank you. State privacy regulators have been so active in 2025. What we're seeing is a shift from states just passing laws, although that a number of laws came into effect, as Dave mentioned, to states really coordinating and enforcing them in meaningful ways. So I want to touch on a few things. In April, the California Attorney General announced the creation of a new consortium of privacy regulators. This is a first of its kind coalition of state privacy enforcers. The consortium started with a handful of members: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Indiana, New Jersey, and Oregon, all states that have comprehensive privacy laws. And just more recently, Minnesota and New Hampshire joined. So their goal is simple but powerful: collaborating on enforcement and sharing intelligence so that companies face more consistent and coordinated oversight across the states. This is a big development. And so what we're seeing is a trend toward, instead of each state acting on its own, regulators comparing notes, coordinating sweeps, and aligning priorities. The first of those sweeps was announced shortly after the formation of the consortium, with California, Colorado, Connecticut launching a coordinated GPC sweep. GPC, shorthand for checking whether businesses honor global privacy control signals, and those are browser signals that automatically tell websites, do not sell or share my data. The sweeps are testing whether companies' opt-out mechanisms actually work, and we've already seen enforcement actions citing failures to honor GPC signals as violations of state privacy law. So let's turn then to the enforcement in action, what we're seeing, particularly in California, which had two major recent settlements, by both of the privacy regulators, the CPPA and the Attorney General. The first is Tractor Supply, which I think that we'll get into in more detail during Sam's section here. There in Tractor Supply, rather, the California Privacy Protection Agency had a number of allegations of deficiencies on the part of the company. First, that the company's privacy notice was inadequate. It only had a short paragraph about consumer rights and hadn't been updated since 2021. The CPA requires annual review and update, so it was just a clear miss. Second, employee privacy. California is the only state that currently applies privacy rights to employees, and Tractor Supply's career site didn't provide required notices or explain how employees could exercise their rights. Third, there were failures of the operationalization of opt-outs. Although the company offered a do not sell my personal information link, submitting an opt-out didn't actually stop third-party tracking. The site also failed to recognize GPC, which I mentioned a moment ago, and didn't explain to consumers how to use various tools. And then finally, partner contracts. The company shared consumer data with partners, but lacked contracts containing required CCPA terms, like limits on how data could be used and obligations to honor consumer choices.
Hey, Laura?
Yes.
Just to make a kind of high-level observation of the summary that you just provided, I think one of the big takeaways I would encourage everybody to take from listening into this program today is that previously it might have sufficed if you had a CMP, you had some software going, you had a notice up, and it looked like you were doing reasonable due diligence. At some point you'd put your notice up, And I think if you take one of the main things you might take away is that that is no longer sufficient. Not only do you have to have your policies and your notices regularly updated. So a real easy one is people go and look at when was the last time that your privacy notice was updated, but also things need to actually work. So it's if people opt out, those signals need to be recognized and they need to work and they need to be honored.
Exactly. And we can expect that regulators are doing that diligence, that additional diligence to just see what happens when you attempt to exercise a consumer right. Another thing that is, I think, notable about Tractor Supply, and this is alleged in the settlement, is that it came from a consumer complaint. So the experience of your users is going to drive the conversation. I don't think that anyone would have identified Tractor Supply as necessarily being a high-risk target for enforcement, but nonetheless really ended up in crosshairs because a consumer was presumably not satisfied with the results it received from the company. There's so much to cover here, but I did want to mention quickly that the other regulator in California, the Attorney General, also had a separate settlement with Healthline Media, which runs health and wellness websites. Some very similar themes, and Dave, to your point, misses that could have been avoided with some additional work by the company. The company failed to honor opt-outs. It was missing contract terms. The Attorney General also said that Healthline disclosed data of a potentially highly intimate nature, like article titles that might reveal health conditions to advertisers beyond what consumers would reasonably expect. And that's a key principle under CCPA, that companies may only use data for the purposes disclosed or compatible purposes. And the Attorney General viewed Healthline's ad targeting as inconsistent with that promise. So to your point, what we see is California looking at not just what companies say in their privacy policies, but whether those words actually match their technical and contractual practices. Wanted to also mention that California is not the only state in the game. In addition to the consortium, Connecticut had a settlement earlier this summer with Ticket Network. This is one of the first enforcement actions under the Connecticut Data Privacy Act. The allegations were straightforward but telling. The privacy notice was nearly unreadable, according to the Attorney General, and it was missing key information about consumer rights. And the rights mechanism, like opt-out links, were misconfigured or did not work. But what really stood out to practitioners about this settlement was how the company handled the investigation. The Attorney General gave Ticket Network a 60-day cure period to fix problems, a grace period that was built into the law. But the company failed to make required changes and told regulators that the issues were fixed when they weren't, and then stopped responding to follow-ups. So as a result, Ticket Network became the only company that failed to comply during the Attorney General's first enforcement round. And the message here is clear that even if a state offers a chance to cure, regulators expect good faith cooperation and real remediation. So, what do these enforcement actions tell us? There's a few themes. States are working together. Technical compliance matters. Dave, this is exactly your point, that regulators are testing websites, clicking on links, checking whether opt-outs actually function. They're not just checking to confirm that you have a privacy policy. And also really important to mention that expectations and cooperation count. Regulators are looking at whether a company's use of data aligns with what consumers would reasonably expect, and how the company behaves once regulators come knocking matters. I also want to mention that and Dave, you identified this at the top. States are moving beyond broad privacy principles into specific enforceable duties, particularly around data minimization, risk assessment, AI use, and sensitive data. The trend is clear. There's more detailed rules, lower applicability thresholds, and fewer exemptions. Maryland is at the top of this list. It's a new privacy law that just came into effect, 2 weeks ago, the Maryland Online Data Privacy Act. Without getting into all of the details, there are a few things that are notable about Maryland. It applies to smaller businesses than many other state laws. It kicks in once a company handles just 35,000 Maryland consumers, or 10,000 if the company makes more than 20% of its revenue from selling personal data. Maryland doesn't exempt nonprofits or higher education, so those organizations need to pay attention also. And then importantly, Maryland introduces a tighter standard on data minimization. Other states say that data should be used for, should be reasonably necessary and proportionate to the purpose it was collected for. But Maryland focuses specifically on collection. Businesses can only collect personal data that's reasonably necessary to provide or maintain the product or service that the consumer asked for.
Hey, Laura,
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Let me jump in here too and just kind of highlight something there. And I'm going to talk about data minimization in a moment when we discuss privacy operations. But I wanted to talk about the limits on processing and sensitive data processing. This, it's you make the statement, but then when you think about how organizations operate in the real world, data is collected from consumers, and it's so very common for data to be collected and then stored somewhere, and companies don't even know that they're storing that data, or they're not using it, or they have collected data for a particular purpose and gotten consent from consumers for processing, with that purpose. And then somebody stumbles upon this information within the organization and thinks of some great creative new business use for it and decides to go ahead and use it for that, which makes perfect sense, trying to be creative and move the business forward. However, that's where problems can occur in terms of use of that data for purposes other than what it was collected for and what consent was gained for. So this is quite easy to happen. It happens all the time. And so it just, I think what we're flagging for you here is that additional due diligence into being aware of that, collecting only what you need, and making sure that you have consent for the types of processing you're going to do, and only processing for the reasons that you collected for.
It's so important, and really, Maryland also, as implicit in what you just said, Dave, Maryland calls out sensitive data. So there are these more strict principles around data minimization generally. We see that California is looking at consumer expectations, but then with respect to sensitive data in Maryland, instead of requiring just consent, it flatly limits the collection, processing, and sharing of sensitive data to cases where it's strictly necessary to provide the service requested. And selling sensitive data is completely prohibited. So you're exactly right that we really need to understand what we have, why we have it, and whether it's necessary, because in states like Maryland, the rules are categorically different than they are in other states. I wanted to also mention July developments in California with major new regulations out of the CCPA. They add real substance to compliance obligations, particularly around risk assessments, cybersecurity audits, and automated decision-making. Now, under the new rules, any business doing something that poses a significant risk to privacy, which includes things like selling or sharing personal information, or using automated tools to make decisions about people, the business must complete a detailed risk assessment. I'll sort of skip the details of what that means, but it imposes new burdens on companies. In addition, companies are required to, at certain thresholds, to complete a new cybersecurity audit. This is being phased in, starting with larger companies based on revenue, but again, new substantive obligations on companies that do business in California. And then for automated decision-making tools, or the rules require a pre-use notice to consumers plus the ability to opt out if the system makes a significant decision. So I wanted to also mention highlights from a few other states. I'm not going to get through all the laws that Dave checked at the top, but Colorado elected to delay enforcement of its new AI Act to June 30th, 2026. That gives companies a little more time to get into compliance with a new duty of reasonable care and transparency for developers and users of high-risk AI. Montana made a couple of important changes to its comprehensive privacy law, including removing the financial institution exemption and adding a duty of reasonable care when processing the data of known children. And Connecticut also expanded its law. Now even small businesses that handle sensitive data or sell personal data must comply regardless of size. Connecticut also removed the GLBA exemption as relates to entities and created a new rules for profiling and automated decision-making. Finally, Connecticut gave consumers a right to request a list of third parties that receive their data. So, I mean, these are all trend lines. And Dave, I think this is your point that businesses, even those that thought they were too small or maybe not covered, need to look carefully at what data they collect how they use both that data and maybe layer on artificial intelligence, and whether their practices align with these new, more prescriptive state standards. Just quickly wanted to wrap up by turning to private litigation, because even as regulators ramp up enforcement, the plaintiffs' bar is definitely not slowing down. Two areas have dominated 2025. These are wiretap claims, principally under California's SEPA statute, and also Video Privacy Protection Act claims have not abated. We're seeing both now increasingly linked to the use of AI, but also still linked to digital tracking tools. So under California's Invasion of Privacy Act, which was written in the 60s, right, long before cookies or even the internet, it's become one of the most frequently invoked privacy statutes in class action litigation. Plaintiffs continue to send demand letters and file suits alleging that pixels, web beacons, session replay tools, chat widgets, chatbots, even embedded SDKs are wiretaps that violate SEPA. And courts remain divided. Some have found that these tools can constitute interception when a third party receives data in real time, but others have dismissed cases reasoning that ordinary website analytics aren't what the legislature had in mind. Importantly, there was an opportunity this legislative session for some clarity. The California legislature had a bill, SB 690, that would have created a commercial purpose exception, protecting routine website operations like analytics from being treated as unlawful wiretaps. And it passed the California Senate unanimously, but stalled in the Assembly more recently. And it's now something called a 2-year bill, meaning that it can't move again until 2026. And even then wouldn't take effect before 2027. So SEPA exposure remains very real. And every chat feature or AI-driven customer assistant behavioral analytics tool could be scrutinized as a potential eavesdropper. So, some practical takeaways. Sam and Dave will address some means of mitigating risk, but a few key points to identify deployed technologies, minimize data collection, implement robust vendor contracts, obtain clear, informed, and documented consent from users, testing and updating your systems, and keeping an eye on these kinds of developments, emerging case law, regulatory guidance, because this is an area of the law that is not going to remain static. It hasn't remained static.
Terrific. Thanks, Laura. And it's that last piece there about CIPA, I was actually going to ask you about that. It's interesting to hear that did not advance. I know that there was this effort in California to limit the scope of that law, and people were watching that carefully, and I hadn't heard that had concluded. So it's a little disappointing, actually, to hear that was did not move through. So, and the takeaway, therefore, is to remain diligent, and that these lawsuits will continue. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I'm going to cover some of the operational considerations to address at your organization some of the risks that were just identified. At the highest level, one of the things that Laura touched on is that enforcement is expanding beyond the big companies. It used to be that companies took a little bit of a heart in the fact that maybe the regulators were trying to make splashy headlines and go after the larger brands that are well recognized. And while that is still happening, it is not only larger companies that are being targeted. With a lot of the regulators are now using technical tools, and we can touch on that a little bit later, to do website scanning, et cetera. And so everybody is within potential target range now. So that is something that you should be aware of. And the sectors, retail, automotive, gaming, it's really sector agnostic. So best to be on guard with regards to that. And no company is too small to be on the enforcement radar is the takeaway there. Global penalties are escalating. These are some, I thought it would be interesting to bring in some international fines under the GDPR, which is, of course, Europe's federal privacy regulation. These are some very large fines, and they tend to trend. So just pointing out the fact that while we're focusing in this program on U.S. laws and compliance, there's a lot going on globally. So if you are a company that operates globally, you need to be aware of not only U.S. requirements, of course, but other jurisdictions as well. And then enforcement now includes AI-related privacy violations. As we've discussed earlier, California has provisions about automated decision-making, which is essentially AI. And those provisions within the California privacy law apply to AI technology. So best to be well-versed in those laws and what they are requiring for you. What does this mean from an operational impact standpoint? It means increased audits, investigations, and litigation risk. As Laura mentioned, letters are being served. We're seeing this a lot out in the field when we work with providing support for our clients. Excuse me. So there's a lot of action out there in the enforcement world. And then I'll leave on this bottom bullet here, the need for cross-functional privacy governance and proactive compliance. Best to not be reactive and scramble around and figure out what you need to do to clean things up after the fact. But it's always best to be considering your personal information collection, use, and storage as early on as possible in the life cycle, the data life cycle, and I'm going to get into that on the next slide. So actually, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, and I believe it is even one of our top bullets here. Yeah, privacy by design and shift left. You're going to hear a lot about this from Sam in just a minute, but privacy by design, it means considering your personal information, sensitive information collection, storage, and use early on. New products and services as they're being rolled out, the earlier in the product development cycle that you can identify what information you're going to be collecting and how you might be using it, the better. And so the shift left refers to just thinking about these things when new products and services are being developed in early conceptual stages. So shifting to the left of the product development cycle or the service development cycle. And then data minimization and purpose limitation. We struck on this a little bit earlier. Data minimization has always been a fundamental privacy, basic privacy principle. Minimize the amount of data that you collect in order to minimize your risk. If you don't need it, don't store it. If you have data lying around that you're not using, it just represents additional risk and doesn't bring any value. So it's important to be sweeping through your systems regularly and understanding what you're collecting, how you're using it, where it's being stored, etc. And then purpose limitation, we touched on this a little bit earlier as well. If you're collecting data for a particular business purpose, it's very important to track that purpose and to use that information for that purpose. If you have additional uses for that information, you want to go back and have some kind of a consent management tool. And again, I think Sam can touch on this in a little bit too, whereby you can legally and ethically gain consent for using the data for the way you want to use it if it changes. Transparency and consent management. This goes to something that we were talking about a moment ago as well. Make sure that your notices are up to date. They should have fresh dates when they were reviewed, at least annually, if not more often. That is just a basic kind of a no-brainer. The last updated date on your privacy notice should be very recent. If it's more than a year old, you're just basically putting a target on your company. So make sure that you're updating your notices and your internal privacy policies as well. Make sure that your cookie banners are working and that you have adequate technical means to be able to collect and store consent. AI governance and risk assessment. As we mentioned a moment ago, California has a new requirement that privacy risk assessments are done. And by the way, I was brushing up on that just before this program. And the requirement actually states that this be done at least annually. So it is not a one and done type of exercise. This is something that you need to be getting in a regular cadence for, putting it on your calendars and doing it regularly. And there's a fair amount of lift to this. I know we're getting a lot of requests from our clients to help with these risk assessments. So something you need to be mindful about and get processes, people, and procedures in place to be able to conduct those privacy impact assessments. And in particular with AI use cases. And then one of the basic principles as AI governance is on the scene now and is beginning to evolve, and people are trying to figure out what constitutes good AI governance. A basic first principle is identify the AI uses within your organization that represent higher risk. If you are using AI tools to sift resumes or health information or do credit reports, anything that has a real significant impact on your consumers, those are high risk use cases. And it's not limited to those use cases. So do some internal thinking, get some privacy teams together internally and make sure that you are cataloging and understanding your high-risk AI use cases, and then understand and monitor the inputs and the outputs of your AI tools to make sure that you're keeping an eye on bias and transparency.
And that's such a good point, Dave, because AI is really developing so quickly and offers so many opportunities for businesses. And it's not to suggest that every use is necessarily high risk, but really understanding what those risks are and how to manage them is critical in order to both differentiate companies on behalf of their management of personal information, but also managing regulatory risk.
Yeah, 100%, Laura. And one of the first things we advise as well when you're looking at creating an AI governance structure within your organization is to catalog your AI technologies, and then understand if you're using AI technologies for relatively low risk things like internal administrative tasks to just speed things up and create first drafts, it's a relatively low risk case. Don't spend a lot of time and energy on that. We all know resources are limited. Pay attention and focus on the high risk cases and really make sure that you're documenting well the tools that you're using and keeping an eye out for bias. So, and by the way, that's a good segue into this last section here, third party and vendor risk management. You have your own internal systems, you have your own internal storage and your own internal people that are managing personal and sensitive information within the organization. But of course, companies of any size whatsoever have many external vendors. And where a lot of your risk as to use GDPR language, controller lies is in your processors, or your subcontractors who you are sending information out to. So make sure that you understand who those vendors are, what information they're getting, how they're processing it, and that they are doing only the processing that you are authorizing. Make sure that your data protection agreements, your DPAs, are up to date. That's something that we regularly are helping our clients with as well. So it's very easy to get behind on this. Subcontractors change, uses change, and it's very easy to quickly fall out of compliance if you don't have a good third party and vendor risk management program in place. And then implement contractual safeguards and conduct regular audits, whether it's an assessment or an actual third-party audit is a critically important task for companies in terms of proper data hygiene. So that's about what I have for operational considerations. And with that, if we don't have any questions, I will move on and turn it over to Sam.
Thank you, Dave. So in putting together this program, we wanted to delve into some of the technical underpinnings for what we're seeing in these enforcement actions, what these demand letters are alleging. And I think first and foremost, it's helpful to step back and just think about the overall data flows that we see at modern media companies, any company with a website. There are data collection points that we're seeing on the website itself. There is data sale and sharing that is happening behind the scenes for the purposes of analytics, for the purposes of advertising. And there's a couple key components that we'll come back to that are critical in this whole journey and flow lifecycle here. And those three pieces here are identity, orchestration, and auditability. So the first part on the identity front, you need to make sure that you have awareness of who the user is and enough identifying information to be able to effectuate that user's choice. Now, there's some trade-offs there. We saw in the Honda settlement, they were asking for much too much information. So there are processes and trade-offs in place for how much identifying information you can ask for. The second piece is orchestration here of how do you make sure that all of your systems, your data collection systems on the page are respecting those user choices, and all of your downstream systems, your analytic vendors, your advertising vendors are respecting the choices of those users. Because as Laura talked about earlier, the regulators are not just looking at what you say now, they're actually looking at what you do. They're looking at how the data flows on your website, in your apps, and to the third parties. And then the last piece is auditability. How do you go and prove to yourself and your own organization, to regulators as they come calling, that these data flows are orchestrated correctly? And I think as part of this, it's helpful to go and look at the Tractor Supply case a little bit and just delve into what we saw in their specific instance. And if we go to the next slide here, the key pieces that were extremely interesting to me that Laura highlighted earlier on the Tractor Supply CPPA decision was that the "do not sell my personal information" link in web form didn't actually effectuate the consumer's opt-out request. And that Tractor Supply subsequently continued to sell or share personal information through third-party tracking technologies used for advertising purposes. And what we start to see here is that the CPPA is not looking at just the cookie set on the page. They're not looking at, do you have the right terms in your privacy policy? They're actually looking at the underlying data flows, the categories of data that are sent, the types of data collection events, the types of data processing events that are happening on the page. And it's interesting to look at what has changed. If you go and look at the Tractor Supply website post this decision, on the right side, I know it's a little bit too small to see here, but their form has changed a bit such that opt-out is no longer done through a form. You exercise your right to opt out back on the website through those toggles, and you make those choices through the cookie opt-out modal. And I think it's important and relevant to just highlight why someone like Tractor Supply may have made this change. And coming from an engineering and technology background here, one of the key principles in the Tractor Supply case is their web form for opting out of sale was hosted on a third-party website compared to their actual tractorsupply.com domain. And in modern browser design, browsers spend a lot of time trying, the technical specifications try to keep all of the information isolated to different websites. So there's some real technical hurdles in orchestrating that opt-out with a separate website hosting that form. So what we saw from Tractor Supply is they moved that opt-out to their own page here. And so there's now these opt-out toggles to go and change your decision about sale or sharing. And I think it's still important to consider the identities needed to orchestrate this signal. So for someone like a Tractor Supply who is sharing or selling data, they may have downstream partners who are processing that data. It's important to make sure that when the user makes this choice, when the user switches this toggle, you have the necessary identifying information to send those signals to all of the downstream systems and ensure that those data collection and data processing practices actually stopped based on what the choice is that's made. So sometimes you do need to collect an email address there or a phone number or something to go and effectuate that choice. But again, it comes back to these big principles around identity, orchestration. And then on this last slide here, we'll get into the auditability side a little bit. What we see from regulators, if we go to the next slide here, is that they have web crawlers, they have various scripts to go and understand these data flows. Regulators and plaintiff lawyers have gotten very smart on how they analyze the underlying data that's being sent. And really, I do mean the data flows. It's not just about cookies anymore. We see that these demand letters are scrutinizing the underlying network payloads and parameters transmitted to third parties. And so it's important to have some way to deeply scan your data collection and sharing on your websites and apps that regulators are looking at. And I think another important piece here is giving yourself and your team the ability to have proactive detection and alerts of potential issues. So Laura mentioned the SEPA claims, the VPPA claims, certainly like cases like Healthline, where sensitive data was found to be sent to other entities. That needs to be part of your proactive detection, part of your alerts. And what we see from these regulators, what we see from these plaintiffs' lawyers is they are scanning your website, they are crawling your website, they are looking for these data flows. Again, this is the network requests and payloads and parameters. And so to play in this playing field, you have to be as well. And the last piece of this is just connecting the evidence to your privacy program. So you need to be able to say when the user goes and toggles something on a modal, you need to be able to go show evidence that that choice actually affected the data processing and signaled those downstream systems. You know, Dave mentioned the processors and the subcontractors being a huge potential source of risk here. You need to be able to show evidence that that signal has actually reached those third-party systems. So again, there's these three components: identity, orchestration, auditability that come into play here. We've seen regulators get much more sophisticated in how they look at the technical flows, and certainly why it was real fun putting together this program here. It is a cross-functional problem of working with the legal team, working with operations, working with the technical team, all together to make this story complete, and to make sure, as Laura was saying earlier, you're not just saying you do something, but you're actually doing that in an evidence-based way.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. That's terrific, and I'm really glad we're ending on this note, because I think it's another one of the major takeaways we hope people who are listening in take away. And this is really a changed environment. As we were preparing for this program, Sam and Laura and I were talking about how there was recently Trevor Hughes from the International Association of Privacy Professionals was interviewing Tom Kemp over at the CPPA, and he asked him, once he arrived at the agency, to take over the helm of the agency, coming from industry, by the way, what was new, what was kind of the biggest surprise. And Tom Kemp said, well, I knew that there were some really smart people over there. I had no idea how smart. And he was referring to their legal skills and their technical skills. And I think that's a very important takeaway here, is that the regulators themselves are using these technical tools to simulate a user experience and scanning websites. They can do that at scale. They can automate that. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about, how if you're smaller, you're still could be caught up in the enforcement analysis, and that's so the same tools that hopefully you're using at your company to monitor and simulate your own user experiences are being used by the regulators. So it's a fascinating new world out there, and it's developing. And Laura, I'm sure you're seeing these in some of the demand letters from your clients. They're very technical, and we're helping our clients understand these demand letters and resolve these issues that these demand letters are flagging.
Yeah, absolutely. The plaintiff's bar is sophisticated. Regulators have the kinds of tools that you've described. I was actually at the Federal Trade Commission when the Office of Technology was first established, more than 15 years ago, and it really set the tone for other regulators needing to have sophisticated lab-based tools to really understand what the consumer experience is and what that looks like downstream. So this is it's accelerating, and we can expect to continue to see that in enforcement and private litigation.
Terrific. Well, with that, we are just about at time. If anybody has any questions, this is the last call for questions. You can pop them in the comments there. But other than that, we are spot on at 11:45 here Eastern time. And it was a pleasure, as always, to be on the panel with you, Laura and Sam and Colleen. Thanks very much for having all three of us on the program today.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great discussion. Thank you all. Chock full of information. Of course, folks, the recording is available unlimited. So access on this page, and we'll share it on the Ketch feed as well. And you also know where to find Dave and Sam and Laura all on LinkedIn here. So just shoot them a DM if you want to get in touch. I'm sure all three of us would be more than happy to carry on the conversation if you want additional legal and counsel, operational feedback, or of course, tech advice. We're happy to keep chatting. So thank you all, and hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Appreciate everyone.
Thanks, everybody.